There are several things that set Segovia Quilts apart from other quilting companies. We offer two styles of t-shirt quilts, the collage style and the simple style. Most online t-shirt quilting companies only offer the simple style. Something else that sets Segovia Quilts apart is we will include jerseys in your t-shirt quilt. And if you don't quite know what I mean by jersey, here is an example of a piece of a jersey. So now this is a sports jersey where it has the little holes all throughout it and you can see straight through it. So this is great when you're actually wearing it and playing a sport, but when it comes to putting it in your quilt, this is not so great if it's not done properly. So most companies out there will do one of two things. They either will tell you they cannot put the jerseys in the quilt because it's impossible or they just won't work out. That's not true because we do it here at Segovia Quilts. The second thing that the companies might tell you is, sure, we'll put it in your quilt, it's not that big of a problem, and you end up having batting poking through all of these little holes in your quilt. So when you first get it, it'll look great, but after that first wash, all of these little holes are going to have tiny little threads and strands of batting poking through. Nobody wants that. It'll look terrible and you won't ever be able to get rid of it. Here at Segovia Quilts, we include jerseys in your quilt. We do a special process where we actually put fabric on the back of all of your jerseys. So now this one has a red backing fabric. It matches the jersey color, which is red, and it closes up all of those holes. So this will be against the batting in your quilt. This fabric here will prevent the batting from poking through all of these tiny little holes. We do it on every jersey that we get. This one is blue. It had a blue outline around all of the logos, so we put a blue backing fabric on this one. This one is white, has a white backing fabric, black backing fabric. So all of the jerseys that are sent to us, we close them up so that the batting won't poke through and so that we can include the jerseys in your quilt. What also sets Segovia Quilts apart from other companies is we put interfacing on the backs of all of our quilt blocks or all of our logos. So this is the inside of a quilt that we are currently working on, and you can see all of this white here is interfacing that has been applied to the back of these particular logos. This one here doesn't have interfacing because it's one of our jersey blocks and we don't need it on these blocks. But you can see all of the interfacing is on the back of all of our logos throughout this whole quilt. And here is a block from another quilt that we're working on that has the interfacing on it, and I want to show you what the purpose of the interfacing is. So if you look at t-shirt fabric without interfacing, here's an example. It is very stretchy. It stretches pretty much in every direction, which is why t-shirts are so dang comfortable, but it's very stretchy. So when we apply the interfacing, it removes that stretch from the t-shirt fabric. There is a little bit of stretch this way, but not like it is before the interfacing is applied. So it removes the stretch from the fabric, which is great when it comes to sewing them together because it allows us to have super crisp points where all of the blocks meet together. The interfacing also comes in handy on some of those older t-shirts that you might have where you've had it so long, you've worn it so many times that the fabric has become very thin. The interfacing will kind of give it that little extra layer of skin, if you will, that'll help add longevity to that specific t-shirt and logo from your t-shirt. Other companies out there won't add the interface because it takes time and it adds a cost to the production of the quilt. Here at Segovia Quilts, we add interfacing on all of our blocks, minus the jerseys, on all of our quilts. It's something that we have done here from the very beginning, and we will continue to do it here at Segovia Quilts. Here at Segovia Quilts, part of your quilt purchase includes an all-over quilting pattern. We have several to choose from. They're listed on our website. And here's an example of different all over quilting patterns that we offer here at Segovia Quilts. This is not a t-shirt quilt, and this is not a customer quilt. This is just a quilt that I have here in-house that I'm using to show you what I mean by all over quilting. So there are several different designs on this particular quilt. We have just kind of an all over meander, a little bit of wave action here, some triangles, a couple of different patterns. So all of these patterns are very close together as far as how far away the stitching is from itself. So here's a 4-inch ruler just to give you an idea of how close the stitching actually is to itself. Why this is important is the quilting on a quilt is actually what helps give the quilt long life. By having the stitching close together, it keeps the batting on the inside of the quilt from shifting around on you. If you've ever bought a comforter from a big box store, normally the comforter will have quilting lines maybe running up and down it or possibly side to side, but those lines are several inches apart. I've seen some where they're up to 12 inches apart. Now you know after that first time you washed that comforter from your big box store, the batting on the inside bunched up and then you had lumps here, lumps there, lumps everywhere on that quilt that you bought or that comforter that you bought. By having the quilting close together like this, that's never going to happen. The batting in this quilt is never going to move, it's never going to bunch up. That's very important when it comes to your quilt because you want it to last a long time, you want it to be comfy, you don't want a lumpy quilt. The other companies out there, when they do their quilts, here's an example that I put together. This is on t-shirts that does not have interfacing, it's not put together yet, it's just an open quilt so you can see the inside here. The companies out there that do t-shirt quilts, when they do their quilting, they will do their quilting on these seam lines here. So all of the center of the blocks of your quilt has no quilting in it. So when you get your quilt, you can do this when it's made already because there's only stitching right around the logo. So now that poses a problem because while this block here is only 10 inches, if you have a quilt that has 12, 14, 16-inch blocks, the batting inside that block can and most likely will bunch up together inside that block. So now you're gonna have a quilt that has big lumps of batting underneath every single quilt block, and that's definitely not something that you want. Another thing that we do differently here at Segovia Quilts is we add binding to all of our quilts. So if you don't know what binding is little strips of fabric that goes around the entire outer edge of the quilt. Here are some examples of binding that we have put on our quilts here at Segovia Quilts. Now we make all of our binding here in-house. So we cut the strips of fabric and we sew them together at mitered angles. So here's what it looks like on the inside, and this is a very colorful binding here that we used on a client quilt. Here's another example of some binding where we actually put multiple different colors together. This looked really, really great on the quilt. I loved the finish outcome of this one. We've got all sorts of different colors of binding. We've even got black and white. Pretty much whatever color you want on your quilt, we can do because we make it here in-house. Now what some other companies out there do is they will take your finished quilt and to save time from having to make or buy binding, what they do is they take the raw edge of the outside blocks, they will fold this one under, they'll fold the back under, and then they'll put them together like this, and then they just sew a stitch line across all the way around the quilt. This is fine. We have done this for a client that specifically asked for this, but this is not the traditional way that you finish a quilt. Quilts are traditionally finished with binding. It gives it a very clean, very nice look to the quilt. You don't ever have to worry about any stitches popping, because if this one stitch that is sewn around the outside edge of that quilt, if this one stitch pops, your quilt is opening up, and then you can see the entire inside of the quilt. The batting will be popping out. It'll just be a whole mess. But with binding on it, it's almost impossible for your quilt to open up. Even if a stitch pops on your binding, the way binding is applied to the quilt, there's almost no chance of your quilt opening up. It's just not gonna happen. Here at Segovia Quilts, we can include several different items in your quilt, not just t-shirts. Some of the items we've had clients include in their quilts include Letterman jackets, patches, jerseys, hoodies, and shorts. Segovia Quilts also has several tutorial videos on how to make your own t-shirt quilt. So if you decide to take the leap and make your own t-shirt quilt, but you don't have anywhere to quilt it, reach out to Segovia Quilts. We offer long-arm quilting services. Segovia Quilts is based out of Crystal River, Florida, just outside of Tarpon Springs, Florida. Segovia Quilts is 100% owned and operated by veterans. As the old saying goes, you get what you pay for. Sometimes it's okay to buy off-brand. It's okay to buy off-brand gummy bears. But when it comes to your memories, stick with the name you know and trust, Segovia Quilts.